of faith.
This is the way. Truth is, I am Iron Man.
Tells me when you'll love this.
Hello, critics, non-critics, and friends. Welcome to the Film Optix podcast, where we take a glance into blockbusters, indie films, and everything in between. I'm your host, Christian, and today I'm joined by my good friend / my co-host, Devin, as always. And alongside us today, we have Mike Thomas from the Chatter After / Collider / the Amateur Otaku podcast. This man is everywhere on the internet, y'all. And today we're here to give our views and insights on the first episode of HBO's original series, The Last of Us, which is based on a video game of the same name. And episode 1 of the series is titled When You're Lost in the Darkness. And before we begin today's episode, you can listen to our podcast on podcast platforms around the internet. That includes Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more. And if you are a new or seasoned listener to the show, we would love to hear from you guys. Follow us on Instagram and follow us on Twitter at FilmOptix. That is Optix with an X. Or you can email us at filmoptix@gmail.com for any movie-related questions. Gentlemen, how's everyone's 3-day weekend? Happy MLK Day, by the way. Mike, glad to have you back. How you been, buddy?
Thanks so much, guys, for having me back. You know, it's a great holiday weekend. It's a lot of pain, though, with The Last of Us. This episode hits pretty hard.
Yeah, definitely. It is. I think it was so smart on their end. Like, hey, let's drop like this amazing show on a 3-day weekend so people have an extra day to watch it if they can't watch it on Sunday nights, which I think is awesome. Devin, what's going on, man? How's your 3-day weekend been?
It was uneventful. I had a bit of a cold, but I'm getting over it now. I actually just wrapped up this first episode about an hour ago, so it's very fresh. And then I saw that Polaroid, and I sent it to you, and the tears wanted to start flowing again.
I've gone through that scene a few times because I watched heavy spoilers video after, because I too watched the first episode this morning. I had some football wildcard weekend stuff going on yesterday. So, I mean, of course, the Bengals getting in the way of The Last of Us on a Sunday night. You know, we got to see how that turns out. So thank you, Cincinnati. Anyway.
That Hail Mary, man, almost made it. I'm just saying.
So close. It
was very close. I was at a bar with a few of my friends. All of them are Bengals fans. And it just... It was crazy. Like, I just didn't understand how, like, they were like holding hands, just like, you know, manifesting that I can pull out this win. And I saw that Hail Mary. I'm like, he almost caught that. I hope you guys know. It was hilarious. But yeah, it's been a pretty good weekend outside of Wildcard weekend for me. Started playing Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion. So the remakester, I guess. We got another remakester on our hands here, Mike. But it's that, you know, it plays, you know, just like the PSP game. It's been a while since I had played it, but I started playing it a few days ago, and I was like, man, I forgot how like good this game actually was. So, with all that out of the way, ladies and gentlemen out there, we're going to be getting into our episode 1 review of The Last of Us series. Again, we're going to get into our initial reactions first, which is our non-spoiler section. And then once you hear this bad boy, that means we're going to get into our spoiler section, but we're not there just yet, but we want to give you guys a little bit of a heads up. After we get into our spoilers, we'll head into our final thoughts and our ratings, and then we'll kind of close on out. So actually, before we even start the review part itself, I wanted to go through and ask everyone their introduction to the Last of Us franchise, whether it is your first time watching it, which I know for both of you guys it's not, but how are you introduced to the Last of Us franchise or the video game as a whole, as we all were? You know, we played the games first, and now we're experiencing the same traumatic story unfold on screen as if we don't need enough pain in our life already. But we'll start with Mike, and then we'll go to Devin, and then I'll close out. So, Mike, what is your introduction to the Last of Us franchise?
Yeah, The Last of Us, is turning 10 years old this year. So I was definitely a teenager when it came out. And I'm pretty sure this was my first M-rated video game. So I got it on sale. It was either on sale or it was through PlayStation Plus on the PS4. I got the remaster. And it was a really difficult playthrough for me. I'm not a big horror guy. I'm not a big zombie guy. So I'm this is a critically acclaimed game. It's on here essentially for free, or, I probably got it on sale for $20. I checked it out. And this episode, that opening sequence is so traumatic. And so I had to struggle to get past this part of the game. And once I did, I was just hooked and invested. And for me, this is one of the greatest stories ever told in video games because it captures all that emotion from an HBO drama, right? Which is why this adaptation is so well done. It captures that emotion and that gravitas from a story like this, but it puts you in the heart of that story. You embody Joel as a character. And so for me, even if the gameplay, by today's standards isn't as great as it could be, especially compared to The Last of Us Part 2, it'll always hold a special place in my heart just because of that.
All right, Mr. Devin, what was your introduction to the Last of Us franchise?
My introduction is definitely the most recent. I believe I first played it. It was either 2021 or 2022, early 2022. So it's definitely very recent for me because I never had a PS4, so I never got the chance to dive in. But then I bought Christian's old PS4 when he upgraded to a PS5 and was able to play Last of Us, and it's everything everyone always makes it up to be. It's amazing. It's a great game. I'm glad I got to play it in time before this show because it just adds that extra weight to everything you're watching and adds that dread, especially this first episode. Having played the game, the things from the first episode, from the beginning of the game, it just makes everything feel so much heavier. And I'm just glad I was able to see that.
It's like watching a car crash in slow motion.
Yeah.
Dude, that is a perfect analogy, Mike, and I could not agree more. For my introduction, it's, I remember when the game came out in 2013, and that was during the time, I'm not sure if you guys remember this, Devin probably should, when Walking Dead was out, we had Dead Island, all these zombie-esque games.
Zombie fatigue was in full force.
Yeah, it really, really was. But, I came across The Last of Us because there was a time when me and Devin were younger when I had a PlayStation 3 before I, found the light and moved over to the Xbox.
It's going to be one of those days.
But I mean, all of my friends were playing Call of Duty on Xbox, so I felt a little left out. And, back then we didn't have the, cross-play or cross-platform that kids are very fortunate to have today. But during the time when I had my PlayStation 3, I came across The Last of Us, and I wasn't sure at first because I was like, is this going to be another zombie game? But to me, at least, this isn't a zombie story because obviously, you are dealing with the infected. Technically, they're not zombies, but it is zombie-esque. And I just fell in love with these characters just all over when it came to, especially Ellie. She's probably my favorite video game character. Right next to Jack and Daxter, of course, but that's also Naughty Dog. But yeah, I was like, is this going to be Uncharted, but with zombies? And I was like, well, no, it was something very different. When I was younger, the gameplay, like Mike said, could definitely have been different. But I mean, in 2013, it's you do what you can, especially on the PlayStation 3 with that cell architecture. But ever since then, I kind of just fell in love with it. And then the remaster came out for PlayStation 4, bought it and beat it on there. Unfortunately, I was never able to platinum the games for the original or the remaster because I think there was a lot of multiplayer trophies of what you needed in order to platinum the game. And I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that.
PlayStation trophies sucked in this era. You had to beat it on the highest difficulty. You had to play all the multiplayer stuff. It was stupid.
It was very dumb, but yeah, that's just my little quick whip for the Last of Us franchise. It was just during the time when I had a PlayStation 3. I think it's when the PlayStation 3 Slim came out is when I bought it. So I got it for a little bit cheaper than the original $60 it was out for. And yeah, it was just a great game. And I was like, man, this is awesome. And now it's coming to PC, baby.
Finally.
What a time to be alive. But yeah, and of course the remake came out, or quote unquote remix, or however you want to put it. The remake of The Last of Us Part 1, which is titled, came out later, or around September of last year of 2022. So it's, PlayStation's been, moving some chess pieces around. Very interested to get into this. But today, of course, we're going to be talking about the series, episode 1. So again, we're going to get into our initial reactions first and then our spoilers. So gentlemen, are you ready to get into this review?
Oh yeah.
I'm as ready as I can be because, again, pain.
Are you ready to find out if you have any idea of what loss is? That's the question.
Yeah, this is, again, like we said earlier, watching a car crash in slow motion, because like Devin said, since we know what the major beats are, it really made this episode in particular very stressful. And I appreciate that. It's a great episode, whether you've played it or not, but that just adds another layer of dread and intensity as it goes along.
Hey, we like pain. That's all we can say. But yeah, I definitely agree. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be right back after this introduction to The Last of Us Episode 1.
If you don't think there's hope for the world, why bother going on?
Dad?
Get it. Said everything, but I get in trouble in there. You make every shot count.
We have a job to do.
And we are back. You just heard a little snippet from The Last of Us trailer, and the creators of this series include Craig Mazin and Neil Druckman, who was the original director on The Last of Us games Part 1 and Part 2. And the stars of this phenomenal cast include Pedro Pascal, Bella Ramsey, and Gabriel Luna, just to name a few. We also have Nick Offerman joining the cast as well. But yeah, this is another stacked cast. And we have Pedro Pascal coming back. You get Bella Ramsey coming back. And the synopsis is as follows. Joel and Ellie, a pair connected through the harshness of the world they live in, are forced to endure brutal circumstances and ruthless killers on a trek across post-pandemic America.
We're in post-pandemic America almost.
Technically, I think so. I like to think we are. I mean, hey, it's 2023 somehow. It still feels like it should be the year 2022. Or just 2020 in general, I should actually say. It literally feels like we went into the new year for 2020 and then we just came out on 2023 on the other side. That's what it feels like, at least for me. But ladies and gentlemen, we're about to get into our initial reactions. So we'll pass it over to Mike first, and then we'll go to Devin for their initial reactions. Then I'll give mine. So Mike, Mr. Collider / Chatter After host, what did you think of this first episode? What are your initial thoughts?
Also, Beyond the Clickers host, a Last of Us podcast. I think this audience would definitely be into that show. I know there's a lot of slashes, but yeah, episode 1, this is everything I would want it to be, right? I love how the beginning of this episode expands on what we already know from the video game, right? They could have just done a 1-to-1 and it still would have been effective, but I'm glad that Druckman and Mazin were able to get into the heart of this story and reimagine it for television. And that's the thing I appreciate most, is because The Last of Us is arguably the most cinematic franchise in all of video games. So if you just did a one-to-one adaptation of that, you'd probably be okay. But they still took the liberty of saying, we're going to add a flashback at the beginning of this episode, and then we're going to develop some characters and some ideas and themes that we don't put you through in the game because it affects the overall structure of this specific episode. And I think it's really effective. For me, it's kind of weird because I feel like all of the emotional beats hit and have the same resonance that you would want them to. But as somebody who does know what's going to happen as the episode goes along, when we get there, I didn't have the same emotional impact as I did when playing it. And that's not necessarily a drawback of the episode. That's just probably me, for once being the manga reader, if this was an anime, right? And I know everything that's going to happen. But yeah, I think Bella Ramsey is a fantastic Ellie. We didn't get a ton of her in this episode, but I thought she was great. Pedro Pascal, I'm just glad we got him outside of that Mandalorian outfit, because the emotion on his face, honestly, is the best parts of the episode, which is so funny in contrast to what he has to do on The Mandalorian, where it's a very physical performance, right? Where he's got to emote with his body. Whereas in this one, there's a lot of great acting just in the face because of so much emotional trauma that he has to go through here. But yeah, I think it was well structured, well paced. As far as spoiler-free thoughts, I love this episode.
All right, Mr. Devin, what did you think of episode 1 of The Last of Us?
Yeah, I thought it was amazing. It's kind of interesting that you mentioned that the emotional parts didn't hit as hard for you as the game, because it was kind of the opposite for me. I don't know what it is, but as far as games go, I don't usually get too emotional about them because I find it easy to kind of separate myself from, because you're seeing video game characters instead of like real life people on the screen. So that's kind of just how I separate it, and it doesn't really hit for me as hard. But in this episode, it hit me hard. Like, I was tearing up in that specific scene, and then seeing Pedro Pascal post stuff afterwards, it's just like, oh, it just hurts so much. And that's what I love about the show so far, is that they, like you said, they're expanding on the game. They're not just one-to-one copy pasting, which they very well could have and would have been the easier route to go, but they're expanding on the lore and the characters and everything, and they're giving you more information that you need to kind of understand this world and what kind of world they're living in and how extreme it is. I just love the intro between the scientist and the interviewer, just going over what exactly this virus is. It's important to explain that it's not really zombies technically. It's more so just like ecological, like fungus type of virus instead of your normal zombie outbreak in other series and movies. So it's good to get that out of the way in the beginning. And then from there, I just love how you spend more time with Sarah specifically. We're not going to get into spoilers yet, but I just love setting that up. And I don't know if this is a hot take or not, but for me, I think the first episode so far is better than the game, at least from what I've seen so far.
Hold on there, Devin.
Is it a hot take? I don't know. I haven't seen anyone else mention it, but for me, that's how I'm feeling right now. It could be recency bias, but
it's very hard for me to even equate the two. I mean, you might be right. The thing is, for me, like I said earlier, all of those emotional beats I have already experienced 8 years ago, and again, recently replaying part 1. And so it also might come down to me not having that same disconnect as you, right? Between the game and real life. So it's very well done. I wouldn't say it's a hot take. It's just you prefer this type of storytelling and I prefer the video game's form of storytelling, but they're both equally masterfully done, in my opinion.
So I'm going to touch back on Devin's point here in a second, but for my initial reactions, it pretty much echoes both of yours. When it comes to what Mike had said about, and I was talking about this with him a few days ago because I was so nervous about the series, because when it comes to live action video game adaptations, 9 times out of 10, they usually flop, whether it is a movie or a series. Of course, we have had multiple fantastic adaptations thus far with Cyberpunk 2077, the Edge Runner series, and then Arcane, which Devin still needs to watch, and Castlevania as well. As far as live action goes, I was so nervous. And then I was talking to Mike about it, and he's like, hey, you have to separate in your brain that you have to critique it and watch it for what it is. It's not the video game. With video games, especially when it comes to the story-driven video games, what the advantage of video games has over film and TV is that you have the empathy of control through these characters. That's why when certain things happen within the first few minutes of the video game and within just within the video game itself, as you're playing as Joel, as you're playing as Ellie, even throughout the journey, you're going through that journey as those characters instead of passively just watching, these events unfold out on screen. But what makes a video game so amazing is that you kind of get a sense of both because you are playing as these characters and you're watching these cutscenes unfold, which, of course, there is no other way that the story goes. That's just how it is. But for the show, I thought they did a very good job of adapting these characters. Like Devin said, we get a few more holes that are kind of filled in with the smaller character moments. We do spend more time with Sarah. The interview at the very beginning of the entire episode it's very, it's about the exposition, kind of introducing people to the Last of Us world who don't own a PlayStation of what this is, because no, they're not technically zombies, but it's like a fungal infection because the hosts are still technically alive. So we can't say that they're undead, but they are quote unquote infected. But I think the first episode was around an hour and 20 minutes. And of course, we know everything that happens, but they do take a different approach. Like you guys said, if it was just beat for beat, it would have been fine. But I do enjoy how they expand on a few things. And there's a few name drops that we actually get in the series that don't happen in the video game. But as far as what Devin said about, I guess, the emotional beats, at least of the first episode, hitting harder than the video game, I don't know. I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but I think just in my mind, when I think of The Last of Us, I think, of the video game, I think of Troy Baker, I think of Ashley Johnson, playing these characters. But I do think Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey have been doing, they've been, doing all the press and whatnot. They seem very excited. Pedro Pascal is fantastic. I'd never thought of him as Joel. I was kind of leaning towards Nikolai Coster-Waldau, aka Jaime Lannister from Game of Thrones, way before the series announced the casting. But I was like, oh, Pedro Pascal, that's something I didn't know that I needed. But it is nice to see him out of the Mandalorian suit for sure, because it's been a while since Game of Thrones, or Wonder Woman 84, whichever you prefer. Life can be good, but it can be better. But yeah, Bella Ramsey, I think she does a great job as Ellie. We haven't seen too much of her as of yet. This is the first episode, so we still have a long way to go. 8 more episodes left. This is 9 episodes total. So yeah, I don't know if what Devin, I don't know if what Devin said is necessarily a hot take, but I think it is maybe it's an unpopular opinion. But I don't know. I feel as, I've experienced this story God knows the amount of times, especially when the remake came out last year, much like Mike. I played that through again, and I don't know, just in my mind, I think I can comfortably, have, video game and Joel Ellie exist in one part of my brain, and then the Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, Joel and Ellie for the TV show. But as far as live action adaptations goes, this is pretty freaking good. I really love the first episode. My mom watched it too with my sister. I was very surprised because I think Mike actually said in his review that this show, it's really for the people who don't own a PlayStation, who don't have to go out and spend $300 or $400 or even $500 for the PlayStation 5 version just to experience this story. But I think PlayStation is I think they know what they're doing when it's like, hey, we have a new version of this game and we have the series coming out. For the people who don't have the series, I mean, for people who don't have the PlayStation 5, they can watch the series and later on, they might end up buying a PlayStation 5.
I was actually going to mention too, I think this is perfect timing for the series to come out, kind of after the run that Walking Dead had, and it's finally over, at least the mainline series that finally ended as of, a couple months ago. So I think it's perfect timing to kind of, in a way, fill that void for people who are looking for obviously a zombie type of show to watch and also didn't want to invest 9 to 10 seasons. Like I stopped after, I don't even know, 4 or 5 seasons of Walking Dead, and it just kept going and going. But I think this is perfect timing for this show because it'll fill that void pretty easily. Obviously, it's not the exact same type of zombies, but it's a very similar vibe.
Definitely. I never even started The Walking Dead because I don't know. I just never got into the show when it first came out. I think, as I mentioned before, like it was during the zombie fatigue where we had all these zombie video games and all of these zombie TV shows and movies were coming out. I was kind of just over it. By then, I think the only thing video game wise outside of The Last of Us I could probably handle was Left 4 Dead 1 and 2. But that's just me altogether. But yeah, this show, they're doing a great job with it altogether. I'm very excited to see just like, obviously we know what happens, but I want to see the smaller moments that kind of make sense. In a way, I guess you can call this like the quote unquote director's cuts of The Last of Us, since Neil Druckman was working alongside Craig Mazin of this. I know there was a lot of things in the original game that Neil Druckman was not able to put in. So I think there are going to be scenes that we're going to be able to see play out that we didn't get in the video game altogether. But was there anything else you guys wanted to touch on in our non-spoiler section before we hit those juicy spoilers?
Before we do, I do have one thing that I guess can still stay in this side of the conversation. I just love how cinematic this show is, right? It felt like a movie.
Especially with the length of the first episode. Very much so a movie length.
Yeah, it's almost feature length with the runtime. And, we probably just take this for granted because it is an HBO original series. But like the scale of this show, like that final shot of the city, that is something, one, ripped straight from the game. So I love it. But two, it is just unbelievable in scale and scope and how beautifully shot, and the cinematography and the score and everything is fantastic. The fact that they ported a lot of the tracks from the game into this episode really helped set the mood, the atmosphere, and like if they changed the score and stuff, that would have been fine, but it just really goes to show that no, this fits the tone perfectly. Why change it? And
not only that, there is a lot of, if you're going by, what's happening in the video game, at least during the beginning, there's a lot of the dialogue that is essentially the same. Like, I think Mike had tweeted on Twitter, word for word, bar for bar. Yeah, for sure. I think that was from the Breakfast Club, wasn't it? The podcast that ended a little bit ago.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I thought. But
copied my whole flow, word for word, bar for bar.
But I do agree with you, Mike. It is very cinematic. And for the longest time, it's like when I was playing the first game before part 2 even came out, I was like, man, I would really love like a movie of this. And apparently Neil Druckman was approached some years ago about making The Last of Us Part 1 a movie, but it was not exactly what he wanted. And I'm kind of glad they didn't go that route. And
yeah, it was originally a movie produced by Sam Raimi, starring Maisie Williams.
Yeah. And speaking of Maisie Williams, her and Caitlin Dever were both in talks to play as Ellie before Bella came into the mix. And I was like, well, obviously HBO actors usually Bella's been in a lot of other things HBO related outside of Game of Thrones. including His Dark Materials. And if you haven't seen Catherine Call Birdie, she is phenomenal in that movie. It's on Amazon Prime, so definitely go watch it if you haven't. But I'm glad they went with Bella because Maisie, I'm not saying that Maisie wouldn't work, but for some reason, like seeing Bella, dressed up as Ellie and her portraying this character, I was like, yeah, it works. It definitely works. I think Caitlin Deaver was my original, like, quote unquote fan casting, but then I got to thinking, like, well, she's a little too old to be playing a 14-year-old girl, but I think if they ever were to do part 2, I think she could play an older Ellie. So I'll just kind of leave that there. But
before we move on, I just want to say, while I agree with you that she would be great as an older Ellie, Bella is already the age Ellie is in The Last of Us Part 2 anyway.
Is she?
She's like 19.
Oh, that's right. I didn't realize how old she was.
There's no point in recasting.
Honestly, that's easier work for HBO, Warner Brothers, and Neil and Craig to do everything that they need to do. So yeah. She just has like such a baby face, I think. I think that's what it is.
That would be a weird recast to do, especially since we don't think it'll be too much longer before season 2. It's kind of like Cassie Lang being recast, just kind of.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's right.
Shoo her away and bring in the bigger name.
Well, I guess it's different for like House of the Dragon because, you have these time jumps. So it's like we kind of knew that going in. But I feel like maybe that wouldn't work because, you have Bella, who is essentially, the face of the franchise when it comes to, HBO at least. And maybe switching actors might be a bit jarring for the more casual audience out there. So yeah, maybe, I don't know. Maybe I just retract my statement, but I still think she would make a fantastic Ellie, but that's just a fan casting of mine. For sure. But are you guys ready to get into spoilers? Because I feel like we need to talk about some spoilers.
Got any tissues boxes around you ready to go?
No, I didn't buy any before watching this. And I asked my mom, she's like, so I watched The Last of Us because she kept asking about it like the entire week. And I was like, yeah. She's like, so I watched it. I was like, okay. I'm like, so what'd you think? She's like, oh yeah, I thought it was great. I'm like, cool. Like, thanks. And then she kind of got into a few of the details, but yeah, she watched it with my sister last night. She like called me super late. I was knocked out by that time, being out with the boys, watching some wild card games. It takes a toll on you, but I'm glad that she's watching it for sure. But ladies and gentlemen, that is your first spoiler warning for The Last of Us episode 1 again. That is your second spoiler warning for The Last of Us episode 1. So if you haven't seen it, definitely go watch it. I think just audiences in general, like I really wish I was watching this with someone who didn't know what was going on to see their reaction. Because, obviously us knowing what's happening, it doesn't necessarily dilute the experience because, this is a different form of media and things are executed in maybe somewhat different ways, but like Mike said earlier, word for word, bar for bar, all together. But yeah, let's get into spoilers. So I just want to open up the floor for you guys because I know I've been talking here for a while. We'll start with Mike. Where do you want to start off when it comes to spoilers? Should we just get into the heart-wrenching scene that is Sarah's death?
We can. It might be a little easier to kind of touch on some things before that too, right? Like, I think Nico Parker as Sarah is phenomenal. And I really appreciate that the episode gives her a good, 25 minutes worth of, she is the main character.
Yes, I love that we get to spend time with her. Like that's such a big difference from the game, where the game you just go, like you start and you're playing as Sarah and you just go. But the show just gives you that time to spend with her, and that just makes it even more so just an emotional moment.
It's so great. And, speaking of people who haven't played the game, it was so interesting because I was watching it live as it was airing on HBO and seeing the hashtag trending and everybody thinking that Sarah was the main character.
Oh yeah, that's
And
a trap.
so, yeah, I love how it trapped them, because the three of us are, again, we have that like, oh, this is interesting. Oh, this is gonna make what happens in 30 minutes even more excruciating. But they legitimately trapped the non-gaming audience, and I think that made that moment hit even harder for them. For me, I love the setup. I love just the little nuances of, we in the game, we have Joel first encounter the infected by one of his neighbors attacking, right? I like how this time we set up the neighborhood, we set up the community that they live in, so when we see it all break down and start to turn against them, that makes that entire event leading up to Sarah's death so intense. And so, yeah, we can talk about that moment with Sarah, but I just love the build up to it and that slow burn to get there.
I also loved the good dog. It was not a naughty dog. He was a good dog.
He was.
I'm stealing that.
What was that dog? What was the dog's name again? I'm blanking on his name. He was a good dog.
Mercy.
Because there is a dog in the beginning of the first game. Because in the beginning of the game, it just
that dog does not have a very good ending in the game.
No. I don't even think you see. I think you just hear the dog, but you don't see.
Yeah,
it.
you hear the whimpering.
Yeah. But actually, to touch on what Mike had said when it came to just the setup and the payoff, I do think, the very beginning of the series, explaining what the cordyceps are, explaining what the fungi is and how that is more dangerous than a virus when it comes to the human race, because there is no cure. And plainly put, we lose. And, that becomes the dominant force. But also, just the intro, even before, we actually get in to the beginning of the episode, the intro was very well done. Of course, using the Last of Us theme from the video game, which I, ripped straight from it. I appreciate that so much, because they didn't try to do anything new or different with it. It is what it is, the same font for The Last of Us. It's all there. This isn't like some, otherworldly The Last of Us, series altogether. I guess you can say it's not, they didn't butcher it altogether, which is really, really great. But what Mike said about, the setup for Sarah, played by Nico Park, I think it was great, because, the entire pandemic happens on Joel's birthday. In the game, it just cuts to, it's just that night where everything happens. But we do get the proper buildup. We see Sarah going to fix her father's watch for his birthday. Her caring about spending the day with Joel on his birthday, saying, hey, I know you have work, but, let's get you a cake. It's your birthday. I want to do something nice for you. And it really... It builds up, and there are those small little moments that do add to the story, which I really appreciate, which is why I think I'm happy with how the story is going altogether. But Devin, did you have any spoilers you wanted to talk about when it came? There's tests, like there's, oh my gosh, there's so much here that they've kind of danced around. Like some things I feel like happen a little bit quicker in the show than it does in the game. Especially when it comes to, I think it was Robert's death. Obviously, we don't get the whole hunting down scene like we do in the video game, but I'll pass it over to Devin so he can give some of his spoiler thoughts.
Yeah, the things I keep thinking about are kind of like the new additions to the show that we've got that weren't in the game, because they did such a good job of world building. Like from the very beginning, of you mentioned the interview with the scientists to kind of set things up. And then even after that, that intro with that little boy that was kind of wandering around, and then he gets found, and that kind of sets up how dark and horrible this world is, because you see the test turn red, and then you can even tell the Pedro doctor or whatever, she even has a moment where she's like, oh God, I have to kill this kid, and then they do it, and the body shows up later for Joel to end up incinerating, and that's just insane to think about, and he didn't even flinch doing it. Things like that. They showed that kind of chart in the doctor's office where it showed the time frames for when people become infected, depending on where they get bit. I thought that was very well done. Very, very quick exposition to give you, just kind of explain how the world works a little better, and he set up the rules for how things work. And then towards the end with the radio kind of decoding that happens, and it's funny that they add that in because it feels like a very video game thing to do, to decode like a radio and based on songs for different messages. Like that's the thing you would do in a video game, and I think that was very cool that they added that here. And it what was the line that Ellie said? It was like code. What did she say?
The code X. Are you talking about the wake me up before you go when she tricks Joel?
Yeah, when she figures it out, she said code solved or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I will say
that was very cool.
Yeah.
So, did you guys catch the whole meaning behind that, right? Because we have Ellie deduce what the code means, what decade means what. And she deduces that 80s means trouble. And so we end the episode with an 80s song playing, which is like...
Yeah, that's why I love that ending so much. It sets up the rest of the series so well.
Yeah, but it's like we know that's Bill. And so does that mean it's trouble with Bill? Or is that just the showrunners being cheeky and saying the next episode is going to be trouble? You know, like, those are the elements that I really love. And you're totally right, Devin. I love them adding the world building, like seeing Joel having to toss that kid's body into the fire, jump cutting, right? Where we last saw Joel holding in tears over Sarah's body. We see how cold he is now, how numb he is, where holding another dead child means nothing to him. And that's why when we get to the end of this episode and he flashes back to that same or a similar encounter he had with Sarah, and now it's Ellie, and you just see the rage in his eyes and the emotions start to overflow. You know what? I can totally see why Devin would say this is better compared to what we got in the game, because they're able to do the flashbacks and everything and tie it all together in a way that
those dead dark eyes he has.
Yes,
it's crazy because first when we see the child in the red shirt, I was like, okay, number one, there's no way this is Ellie. I was like, okay, this is 20 years later. Ellie should already be born. I was like, what are they doing here? And at first when they were giving and I guess I kind of forgot about it, when they were testing the child to see if she was infected or not. For a second, I was like, oh, like red means not infected. It was like, oh, wait, never mind. It just flew over my head. I was like, I don't know why I was thinking that. I was like, hey, it's an adaptation. It could be different. I really don't know. But yeah, as soon as you see the officer's like face and they give the child I guess you could say a quick, like calming death almost, because they kind of, just stick the needle in. And then,
just euthanize.
Yeah, euthanize.
Keyword youth.
Yeah, and then it's that was pretty heartbreaking. But to touch on what Mike was saying towards the very end of the episode, where you have Tess, who is fantastic in this series. I was like, wow, we finally get more with Tess.
I love that actress. I was trying to figure out what I've seen her in, and then I finally figured out it was Mindhunters is what I saw her in.
Anna Torv, she's so good.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And we get a little bit more of, what Joel and Tess's relationship is. I mean, we kind of feel like they are somewhat together in the games, but again, it doesn't really explain.
It's a little more ambiguous in the games, but for this one, it just jumps right into more romantic than anything.
Yeah, which is really nice. But also what Mike was talking about when, when we find out that, Ellie is infected, she's hiding this big secret from, that only Marlene knows, which of course Marlene is playing herself. The actor is playing, it's the same actor from the video game. But when Joel goes to protect Ellie during that flashback scene, he doesn't necessarily have like a form of attachment yet, but he has been tasked to bring this, this child to Capitol building. It's like, hey, the Fireflies are going to take her over from there. Cool. No harm done. But, she's cargo. It's his job to get her from point A to point B. And then when Joel leaps for that guard who we saw early in the episode, another nice little addition where, you have that nice little world building to set up and to pay off. If you look at Bella's eyes, she was into it. She's like, holy crap, like nobody's ever protected me this way before. Like this guy I just met just lunges.
Yeah, there was also that moment when they're talking to Marlene and she goes, you don't know what they're capable of. And she's like, what are they capable of?
Yeah. But like Bella's eyes, she was so into that scene. She's like, oh my God, yes. Like, whoa, like what is happening? Like someone is protecting me and they barely know me. And we see how crappy and how unhumanistic these other characters can be in this world. Like everyone's just out for themselves. You know, you have the Fedra, which kind of it's like the last remnants of the government altogether. Then you have the Fireflies, the rebellion, and it's like everyone's really just out for themselves. But when you see someone performing selfless acts in this world, it's like the biggest deal to them. So I thought that was pretty powerful.
And it mirrors the first scene when they're encountering the neighbor, right? Joel kills that elderly woman who was infected. That's the first encounter that they had.
Yeah.
He kills her to protect Sarah, and Sarah is devastated. She is crushed and heartbroken. So I think it's very fascinating how that scene also sets up how Ellie might enable the darker, more aggressive tendencies inside of Joel compared to Sarah. So it's like these two are a very different pairing than what we saw at the beginning of the episode. We'll see how that works for them going forward.
Yeah. In the game, he's a little more ruthless in the beginning.
Yep.
Yeah, he's kind of just in the game, you know, when after Sarah's death, it just cut, you know, it's the same 20 years later, but it just cuts straight to, you know, Tess coming back from Roberts and, you know, him waking up. But yeah.
Speaking of 20 years later, this is how you do time jumps, HBO. This worked. I was not confused in any capacity. There were no children with long wigs confusing me, but this is how you do it. Pedro Pascal looking good with the gray silver hair.
Yeah.
Gotta love it.
Yep.
Yeah. Devin said, I need title cards. I need exposition of what's going on.
I always love a dramatic title card where it's like many years later, like in Avengers Endgame when they did it, and in this when they did it. It just adds to it.
Yeah, it was a nice touch for sure. It's a crazy ride, but I really just enjoyed everything that we've, you know, experienced so far. As far as, you know, will this ever replace the experience of me playing the games? Probably not, but I do think it is a nice companion piece to the video games for those who don't own a PlayStation and whatnot. But I wanted to open the floor back up if you guys had any other last thoughts before we get into our final thoughts and our ratings.
I just have one question for you guys, and that comes to we've been talking about Tess, right, and her interaction with Robert. That's a mission in the video game where you are tasked to go down there, kill his goons, and try and get that battery back. Do you miss that action sequence? Like, I know we can't have one-to-one video game fight scenes, but the fact that there was not a lot of action or suspense in that sort of form, did that affect the episode at all?
There was an explosion, which was nice. Gotta love a good explosion.
Yeah.
Very conveniently timed explosion. Yeah.
To answer your question, Mike, I guess because I was watching Mike's review of it, because he is the soothsayer here. Obviously, we all know what happens, but he has seen all 9 episodes. But you know, he's being a very respectful host and not obviously, you know, just blurbing out stuff, which, you know, I don't think anyone here on the show would. But I remember you mentioning that, you know, there isn't as many action scenes. And I remember Craig Mazin and Neil Druckman kind of stating the same, saying that, you know, it's about, you know, the characters first and foremost, which we kind of already knew that, but it seems like this, from what Mike's review, from his spoiler-free review, it seems that it is less action heavy. I don't know if it necessarily takes away. I guess I need more time with the show to figure out that question. Because, you know, like you said, when the whole thing with Robert, like, that is the mission. Like, we were chasing this man down in the video game. Like, we were hunting him down, trying to get these guns. But I actually like how they, instead of the guns, it's a battery in the show trying to find Tommy. So there are things that they're able to kind of look back saying, hey, The Last of Us, video game is fantastic. What can we do different for TV? But I think I need a little bit more time with the show to figure out if I miss the action sequences or not. Obviously, another big thing I guess is missing is spores, but it makes sense because, if you're trying to recreate this world for TV, you have to make it as realistic as possible. And, if there were spores, they would literally be everywhere. And I was like, yeah, I guess that is a smart idea. But they've kind of used a scapegoat for that, where it's kind of like an interconnected hive mind for the fungi, which makes sense. So it's not like they're just taking it out. We're getting something in return that works well for TV.
That's another thing, actually. So you guys got the first look at the tendrils, right, from the old lady.
Oh, all right.
That was really good.
That was good.
That was just whatever. It just looked like. I don't know if you guys have ever seen like potatoes when they go bad. It kind of looked like that when there's just kind of just like weird little. It's hard to explain, but it just looks creepy, and they did such a good job. Also, I wanted to mention, whenever any zombie-like creature runs, infinitely more scary. They did a good job of showing that here, because when Joel was getting chased by that guy, that was pretty intense. Because when they run, that's when your pants get soiled.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because during our Train to Busan review, Brandon and Jayla had a whole discussion about fast zombies versus slow zombies, and it's fast zombies are infinitely more terrifying.
Yeah, they're like they just become track stars out of nowhere, and you're like, I have to outrun Usain Bolt. This isn't fun. But yeah, that is another thing. Also, before we close out here, before we get to our final thoughts and ratings, does anyone know why? And I mean, this is like such a small nitpick. It's actually more just a question of why they changed the year of when Outbreak Day now, which is known as Last of Us Day, like why they changed the years of when the outbreak happened. I'm not sure why they did that, but I wasn't sure if anyone.
What was the year in the game? Was it 2003 in the show?
Yeah, 2003 in the show, and then 2023 is when the events of the actual, after Sarah's death and whatnot. But yeah, they changed it from, I believe it was 2012 was in the game.
It was like the year the game came out, like 2013.
Yeah, 2013. Yeah, that's what it was. I'm not sure why they changed it. I wasn't sure if anyone.
I would guess they wanted to have a more current day feel for us in 2023, having lived through a pandemic. There's a lot of similarities you can get to there. That,
and also technology. This is something that I've mentioned on our Stranger Things conversations before, is that there's a reason a lot of shows are now being set in the 80s and the 90s, because if everyone has access to cell phones and tablets and all that stuff, it kind of takes some of the suspense out of it. Like, especially in like the horror genre, why don't you just call someone? Why don't you just call for help? Why don't you just FaceTime the event so people see what's happening? Yeah,
Joel, pick up your Motorola and give someone a call.
Pick up your BlackBerry and give someone a call.
So in 2003, having technology stop, right? The iPhone is never created because of this pandemic that has happened and ravaged the world. I think that's why, personally.
Maybe. Yeah, I guess it was just something I noticed altogether. But like I said, it's not really like a gripe. I was just like, why did they change the year? And I guess that pretty much answers my question there. So let's get into our final thoughts and ratings here. I'll pass it back over to Mike so he can give his final thoughts and ratings. Then we'll go over to Devin, and then I'll give mine, and then we'll skedaddle on out of here.
Final thoughts. Joel had the worst birthday ever, and that's saying something, because my birthday's January 6th, so I can speak from bad birthday experiences. But yeah, this is a great episode, a terrific adaptation of what the first chapter of The Last of Us is. There's no negatives really for me in this episode. It was very interesting how they did tweak how Joel and Tess meet Marlene and Ellie. It's very abrupt. It's very sudden.
Yeah.
And I can't say it's, worse than the game. It's just different. And that's the thing where you get into an adaptation. When you follow it as closely as this show does, it just makes the changes stand out more. And that makes a very fascinating watch, to say the least, especially
because in the game, isn't it that Joel kills all those people, and then in the show they're killed for him? It kind of seems like they're setting him up to be more of a likable character than in the game, so far at least.
That's why I posed the question of how'd you guys feel about them taking that sequence out, because that does change how we view Joel, because he is going out and just massacring all these people to get the thing that he and Tess need. I think the guns, essentially, in the game.
Right. So I think I might have a half answer. I think for the game, obviously, we see everything play out. We see everyone in the world of The Last of Us is a great character, much like in Westeros for Game of Thrones, where there is no necessarily good or bad people. And if there are, the inherently good person, they get offed super quick. R.I.P. Ned Stark. But, I mean, heck, even with Jon Snow, everything that happens with him. But I'm not going to, in case Devin wants to ever watch Game of Thrones, we'll see. But I feel like what Devin was saying, to set up Joel to be more of a likable character in the show, a lot of the ruthless things that he will go through might just be mentioned or alluded to outside of him protecting Ellie. But, we're only one episode in, so we're not entirely sure. But I do agree with what you said, Mike, when when Ellie just pops out of that room. For a second, I was startled. I was like, okay, there she is. So I was like, oh my gosh, she really, it's like she just, I don't know, started from the back of that room and just ran straight through. They're like, okay, go, go, go. And I was like, Jesus, what? It startled me for a second, but it's, I don't know. When it comes to that action, that scene, it did kind of just happen where Marlene's like, oh, things went sideways. Rob tried to resell the same battery again. And then, they kind of mention about Tommy. And it's like, oh, here's Ellie. You're going to take her. And it's like, whoa. It was pretty abrupt of when that happened, because I feel like in the video game, it was a little bit more fleshed out. They took their time, this is what's going on, yada, yada, yada. And then we eventually, built up to that happening, because it seems as if Ellie and Marlene in the game have more of an understanding already. They're already familiar with each other more so than they are in the show, because now that we're in spoilers really quick, and I'll get to I'll let Mike finish up, and then Devin. They mention Ellie's friend Riley, in the very first episode. That does not happen in the game. So, and it's like, oh yeah, we put you in the Fedra University. That was the safest place that Ellie could be. And they kind of allude to Marlene knowing Ellie's mother, but they don't necessarily touch on it in the show, but they do in the game. So I don't know. I guess I need to watch more for sure. Yeah. But sorry, Mike, continue. I'm so sorry.
You're good. But that's why I posed the question, because that does reframe that entire interaction. And like I was saying, I wouldn't say it's a worse version of it. It's just different. And I think that just highlights again what we've been saying this entire episode of they respected the source material, but they were also aware enough to say, hey, we can have some fun with this. We can change some things around. And I do love the interaction between Ellie and Marlene of, are you my mom or something? Do I look like your mom? No, you do not. It's like, we got to get Ellie's sense of humor in here sometimes. Yeah. And it's great. Love this episode.
Basic biology, kid. Let's think about this.
well, I don't know. We saw Joel's daughter. That biology doesn't exactly match up, so who knows?
Yeah, because we never. Well, I guess it depends on what race. Well, yeah, I don't know because we never.
Don't think about it. Just laugh.
The joke works.
I was like, yeah, I can't go down that rabbit hole today. But really quick,
Ooh, it's Sarah's mom. So many thumbnails with arrows pointing everywhere.
Is it Marlene?
you know, there's going to be some videos out there. There's going to be like.
I mean, they already knew each other.
Yeah.
I mean.
That is very true. Marlene is Sarah's mom. Oh my gosh, that would be crazy. Really quick, Mike, what would you give a rating for the first? Actually, no, because we decided that we're not going to give ratings until the very end of the episode, or not the episode of the series, because the whole She-Hulk thing happened, and yeah, everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, 2 episodes in, this is terrible," and it's like, well, let's wait until the end. So even though we know what happens, I guess on a adaptation level,
Do we?
Oh, does he know? So instead of just grading the episode itself, I guess like on an adaptation level, you would say that this is pretty faithful or unfaithful.
If we're going, adaptation level, very faithful. It does everything that I would want an adaptation to do. It takes what we know and expands upon it and repurposes it for a new audience so that they can experience this story. Because again, this is a 10-year-old game now. And there are still people who haven't played it because they don't own a PlayStation or they can't get it on Steam. And so the fact that this exists and they're able to experience it in such a high quality, basically the same way we did, perfect.
Okay. All right, Devin, really quick, what are your final thoughts and what is your adaptation rating?
Yeah, so far so good. I think they nailed the pilot here. Came in with high expectations and they met them so far. And I just love how they're adding to the world instead of just copy and pasting it.
Yeah. So on a scale from super faithful to unfaithful to sort of faithful, what would you give it? Just for the first episode.
So far, it's super faithful, except for the one kind of change where they had the ending where Joel doesn't kill those people that they're already dead. It's kind of the main change, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. For me, obviously.
Agreed.
Yeah. For me, for final thoughts, I pretty much echo what both of these gentlemen are saying. I think my worries have simmered. You know, we still have a long way to go, but it seems that they are, you know, copying it, but also expanding at the same time. And I think this is the best live action adaptation we've had thus far. Again, we still have a long way to go to see how other events play out, but I'm sure we'll still be crying all the same. We ultimately know how everything ends anyway, but it's just, you know, the path is going to be a little bit different, which I appreciate. I appreciate that it's not just a bar for bar, word for word types. Well, word for word is fine, but like, you know, if it's just, you know, the same events happening on screen, then that would make for a pretty, I'd say not a boring adaptation, but a very safe choice if they wanted to go that route. But Craig Mazin, you know, he's been canoodling with Neil Druckman. If you haven't seen Chernobyl, there's a lot of, you know, there's a reason why Chernobyl won 11 Emmys underneath Craig Mazin himself. So he really knows how to make a show. But all I have to say is this Emmy season is going to be crazy. You're going to have Better Call Saul, The Last of Us, HBO's other Goliath, House of the Dragon, and Stranger Things going up. I'm assuming they will all be in for like the best drama nominations, but we'll just have to wait and see because there's other TV shows that will be out. But you know, it will be like HBO versus HBO for the most part. Maybe some AMC in there, but yeah, overall, I think that it's a very faithful adaptation so far, and I can't wait to see how they adapt the rest of this story. So that concludes our episode 1 review of The Last of Us. Again, the first episode is titled When You're Lost in the Darkness. And really quick, I wanted to pass it back over to Mike so he can let everyone know where they can find him on the internet and what is coming up in his life.
Well, again, thank you guys so much for for having me. It's okay. You know, what's going on in life? We have the Last of Us podcast on the Chatter After channel. It's essentially a podcast within a podcast when you think about it, called Beyond the Clickers every Tuesday night at 8:30 Eastern Time. We are live streaming, talking The Last of Us. So we are going to be breaking down episode 1. So it's live. Come in the comments. Come join us on YouTube. At the Chatter After, and you can follow me at Novice Cinephile on all platforms, TikTok and YouTube and Twitter especially. The YouTube side for my personal channel, we've got an Avatar video, Avatar The Last Airbender. I have to make that distinction now. Thanks, James Cameron.
Right.
We've got a video breaking down the Netflix show that's coming out this year, so that should be fun. But yeah, Beyond the Clickers, the Chatter After. Christian actually joined us for our review of Vox Machina Season 2. That embargo is lifted. You can check out that video or on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts.
All right. Again, thank you so much for coming on, Mike. We would love to continue this journey with you whenever you have the time. We're all busy. It can get kind of crazy around this time of year, but I mean, it's so early as well. And it's only January. There's so much coming.
No.
And I'm looking at the schedule. I'm like, how are we gonna do this? But you know what? We've done it before. We can do it again. But it is gonna be a crazy year for TV, movies, and video games. Are gonna be super hot this year. I feel like within 2022, it was like so, but like this year, it's starting with a bang on all fronts when it comes to movies, TV shows, and video games all together. And that is a wrap on today's episode. Again, go watch this series. It is fantastic. If you don't own a PlayStation, this is the perfect solution for you, unless you want to go on to YouTube and watch all the amazing, cinematic cutscenes from the remake of the Part 1 that came out later last year. But that is a wrap on today's episode. And if you like what you heard on today's episode, please subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform of choice, and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Film Optix. That is Optix with an X to stay in the know. And as always, make sure to share an episode of our podcast with a friend, whether it be your mother, your brother, or your significant other. Make sure to share an episode of the Film Optix podcast with a movie lover in need. And really quick, let's take a quick peek at what's coming up on the show within the coming weeks. What is out right now, you can listen to our Megan review that me and Devin covered all together, and that was a fantastic time. Amazing movie if you haven't seen it already. You can also check out our Puss in Boots, The Last Wish review that is out on the podcast and on all major podcast platforms on the internet. And really quick, of course, what's coming up next, we're going to be covering The Last of Us HBO series weekly for you guys. We have a Velma review that me and Devin are going to be covering. And we also have that 90s show spoiler-free review that I covered with Amanda, aka AMX NDA Reviews. And again, thank you all for listening. And remember, if you enjoy the show, leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And follow us on Twitter and Instagram again to stay in the know. I'm Christian. That was Devin and Mike signing off. And we'll see you guys in the next one.